In the year 530 AD, a man named Benedict of Nursia wrote a set of rules that would reshape European civilization for the next 1,000 years. The Rule of Saint Benedict was not a theological treatise, it was an operating manual. It dictated every hour of a monk's day, and it contained one absolute requirement that would have consequences no one could have predicted. Monasteries had to be entirely self-sufficient. No trade for essentials, no dependence on the outside world, and no idleness. Every monk was required to work with his hands, and the most important work was growing food. That single mandate forced medieval monks to become the most sophisticated agricultural engineers in Europe, and they developed techniques for year-round food production that we are only now beginning to understand again. To appreciate the scale of the problem these monks faced, consider the plan of St. Gall. Dating to around 820 AD, it is the only surviving major architectural drawing from the early medieval period, and it depicts a monastic compound designed to house roughly 110 monks, 115 lay visitors, and 150 workers. That is nearly 400 mouths to feed every single day from what could be grown on the monastery's own land. Now factor in the dietary restrictions. Monks followed strict vegetarian diets for much of the year. Meat was restricted or outright forbidden during long periods of fasting, which meant they were disproportionately dependent on vegetables, herbs, and legumes compared to the secular population around them. You cannot feed 400 people on bread and prayer. You need a system. And systems are exactly what they built. Around the year 800 AD, Charlemagne issued the Capitulare Divilis, an imperial decree mandating that over 70 specific plants be cultivated across the empire's estates. It was an extraordinary document, essentially a continental agricultural policy, but the secular estates largely ignored it. The institutions that actually carried it out, meticulously and systematically, were the monasteries. Monastic gardens grew an impressive range of crops that would be recognizable on any modern farm. Leeks, onions, garlic, carrots, parsnips, turnips, cabbage, kale, radishes, beans, peas, fennel, and beets. These were not primitive subsistence plots. They were carefully planned, intensively managed food production systems. We know this in remarkable detail because monks were, critically, literate. They wrote things down. In the 9th century, a monk named Walafrid Strabo at Reichenau Abbey composed a poem called Hortulus, meaning the little garden. It is one of the earliest surviving European gardening texts, and it is far more than poetry. Strabo describes tending his garden by hand, growing sage, rue, melons, fennel, lilies, poppies, and roses, and he details their medicinal and culinary uses with the precision of a modern herbalist. He writes about the specific challenges of soil, weather, and pest management. This was applied science recorded in verse, and it survived only because a single manuscript copy made it through the centuries intact. The cultivation methods were advanced. Monks used astronomy and tracked star positions to calculate optimal planting and harvesting times. They monitored seasonal cycles with a precision that most secular farmers of the era could not match. Their gardens featured raised beds with sophisticated irrigation systems. Water sources were deliberately placed at the highest point of the garden, so gravity could distribute water through a network of smaller channels running alongside the beds. No pumps, no mechanical systems, just an understanding of physics applied to agriculture. But all of this still left one fundamental problem unsolved: winter. In Northern Europe, the growing season is brutally short. Even the most productive summer garden cannot feed 400 people through 6 months of cold and darkness. Storage helped. Underground root cellars maintained stable temperatures between 0 and 2 degrees Celsius, with humidity levels of 90 to 95%. Turnips, parsnips, carrots, cabbages, and beets could last months under those conditions. But storage only preserves dead harvests. Monks wanted something more ambitious. They wanted to keep plants alive. This is where the story takes its most remarkable turn. The Romans developed a heating system called the hypocaust. It was elegant, but demanding. Hot air from a continuously burning furnace circulated beneath a raised floor supported by rows of stone pillars. Roman baths and villas used hypocausts extensively, but they required constant fuel and constant labor to maintain the fire. For monks bound by vows of poverty and by strict schedules of prayer, that was impractical. They could not assign someone to tend a furnace around the clock, so they did what engineers do. They redesigned the system to store heat and to cut the need for a continuously burning fire. The medieval innovation was called the heat storage hypocaust, and it represented a fundamental shift in thermal engineering. Instead of circulating hot air continuously, monks piled granite stones on top of an underground vaulted furnace chamber. You would fire the furnace once with a load of wood. The granite absorbed enormous quantities of thermal energy. Then, when the fire burned out and the smoke cleared, you sealed the chimney damper and opened vents in the floor above. The stored heat radiated upward, not for hours, but for days. The thermal mass of the stone did the work that a continuously burning fire had done for the Romans, but with a fraction of the fuel and labor. It was passive heating. It was, in the truest sense, a medieval thermal battery. If this sounds theoretical, consider the evidence. In 1822, scientists conducted a test on a heat storage hypocaust at Malbork Castle in Poland, a system that was already 400 years old at the time of testing. After burning 0.7 cubic meters of spruce wood for 3.5 hours, the 850 square meter hall above went from 6 degrees Celsius to 22.5 degrees Celsius in 20 minutes. That alone is striking. But 6 days later, the air still rising through the floor vents measured 46 degrees Celsius. 6 days of useful heat from a single firing. The monks had access to this technology for centuries, and they did not limit its application to warming their dormitories and chapter houses. They used it to grow food underground. The principle was straightforward once you understood the thermal dynamics. Underground chambers buffered by stone thermal mass maintained stable, controlled temperatures regardless of what was happening on the surface. In autumn, as the above-ground growing season ended, monks transplanted living plants from their garden beds into these underground cellar spaces. The plants did not thrive in the way they would under full summer sun. They did not grow rapidly or produce abundant new growth, but they stayed alive. In cool, humid, stable conditions, with warmth radiating from the hypocaust stones below, transplanted vegetables and herbs persisted for months. They remained edible. They extended the harvest season far beyond anything that was possible in an open field or even a walled garden. This was not cold storage. This was underground cultivation, a controlled environment where living plants were maintained through the winter using nothing more than fire, stone, and an understanding of how heat moves through mass. The full monastic growing system was not any single technique. It was an integrated network operating across multiple environments simultaneously. Above-ground walled gardens handled spring, summer, and autumn production, with stone walls creating microclimates that extended the shoulder seasons. Raised beds with gravity-fed irrigation allowed intensive vegetable cultivation in limited space. Orchards were planted in cemetery gardens, where fruit trees producing apples, pears, and cherries served double duty as symbols of paradise and as reliable calorie sources. Underground root cellars preserved the autumn harvest through winter, and underground growing chambers, heated by the thermal mass of the heat storage hypocaust, kept transplanted crops alive when nothing could survive above ground. Alongside all of this sat the physic garden, the medicinal herb garden, where plants served as both food and pharmacy. Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century abbess, became known as the first woman physician in European history for her extensive work cataloging the medicinal and nutritional properties of plants grown in monastic gardens. She was consulted by kings and emperors. Her knowledge did not come from abstract study, it came from decades of hands-on work within these integrated growing systems. The medieval warm period, spanning roughly the 10th through the 13th centuries, aided production. But when the climate cooled sharply in the 14th century, the underground and season extension techniques monks had developed became not luxuries, but necessities. They were already prepared for climate disruption because they had built resilience into their food system from the beginning. Then it all disappeared. In the 1530s, Henry VIII dissolved the monasteries of England. It was not a quiet administrative change. It was a systematic destruction of institutions, properties, libraries, and knowledge systems. Similar suppressions occurred across Europe over the following centuries. When the monasteries closed, their agricultural innovations went with them. This was not a case of knowledge gradually fading as better methods emerged. This was an abrupt, politically motivated erasure. Monks had been the primary literate class, maintaining written records of gardening techniques, plant uses, cultivation calendars, and engineering specifications. Secular farmers passed knowledge orally, locally, from parent to child. That knowledge survived because it was distributed. Monastic knowledge was institutional and centralized. When the institution was killed, the knowledge died with it. The heat storage hypocaust fell out of common use by the 16th and 17th centuries, replaced by tile stoves that were simpler to construct and maintain. The tile stove heated a room adequately, but it had no underground growing function. It was a step backward in capability, disguised as a step forward in convenience. The great documents of monastic agriculture, the Capitulare de Villis, the Plan of St. Gall, and Walafrid Strabo's Hortulus, survived only by accident. Each exists as a single manuscript copy. If any one of those documents had been lost, as thousands of others were, we would know even less about what the monks accomplished. What makes this history more than an academic curiosity is its direct relevance to problems we face right now. Modern passive solar greenhouses and earth-sheltered growing systems are, in many cases, reinventing what monks engineered 1,000 years ago. The core principles are identical. Thermal mass, using stone or water or concrete to absorb and slowly release heat. Underground temperature buffering, exploiting the fact that soil a few feet below the surface maintains a nearly constant temperature year-round. Controlled ventilation, managing airflow to distribute warmth without losing it. Seasonal transplanting, moving living plants into protected environments to extend their productive lives. These are not medieval curiosities. They are engineering principles, and they work. Elliot Coleman's Winter Harvest Handbook, published in 2009, demonstrated that year-round food production is achievable in Maine, one of the coldest agricultural regions in the United States, using unheated greenhouses. His techniques rely on thermal mass, season extension, and an understanding of plant dormancy that is remarkably similar to what monks practiced in their underground growing chambers. The horticultural technique called forcing, bringing plants into active growth outside their natural season through temperature manipulation, has been formally recorded since at least 1608. But the monastic roots of this practice reach back centuries further. We did not invent these ideas. We forgot them and then rediscovered them, often without realizing they had been discovered before. The permaculture and regenerative agriculture movements are now promoting low-tech passive growing systems that use thermal mass and underground environments to produce food year-round without electricity. In an era of energy uncertainty, rising fuel costs, and climate instability, this medieval knowledge has arguably never been more relevant. These systems require no grid connection, no fossil fuels, no complex supply chains. They require fire, stone, soil, and patience. For nearly 1,000 years, the most advanced food production system in Europe was operated by people who had taken vows of poverty. They did not have grow lights. They did not have climate-controlled greenhouses or computerized irrigation. They had an understanding of thermal physics, a mastery of passive engineering, and the institutional discipline to maintain complex integrated systems across generations. And it worked. When they were swept away, their knowledge was buried more thoroughly than their dead. The manuscripts survived by luck. The techniques survived by echo, fragments surfacing in later traditions without attribution or context. It has taken us 5 centuries to start piecing it back together. Perhaps it is time we stopped reinventing what was already known and started remembering what was deliberately forgotten.